But once we start, the first order of business, though, is we do need to have approval of the minutes from that last meeting in January. So are we going to start?
Yes, you're recording now.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, make the host.
Okay. Anyone have any comments on the minutes?
Nope.
Okay. We're approving.
I move approval.
Unanimous. Okay, we don't have to do the roll call, right? We did that, Diane.
Yes.
Okay, and so our topic for the day is financial performance.
Right. Just for anybody on the recording, this is Phil Hahn, who is our main contact at Security Benefit Corp for the defined contribution plans, which comprises both the 401A plan and the 457 plan. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Phil, and he is going to share his screen with some of these items.
So appreciate the time. Thank you. It's been a little bit. I think you should be able to see my screen right now that shows the retirement plan performance report card, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, beautiful.
So this is where I'll start. I mean, this is something we've always discussed. These are both the same type of platform that we use for both the 457 and the 401A plan. It's called SFR, Saving for Retirement or Security Financial Resources. So what we do on a quarterly basis, this gets sent out to you, the plan sponsors, the town, and it's prepared each quarter. This is the latest quarter of the report card. So every quarter we go through, and the things that we look at just as a high level today for our meeting, as a reminder, we're looking at the total return of 3 and 5 years in their median or peer for their categories, the risk adjusted return, Sharpe ratio, no less than 75% of their peers, as well as the operating expenses, making sure they're no more than 75%, again, greater than their peers in their category. And if they do, we put them on a watch list. There's a reminder that watch list goes 0 to 3/4. It's kind of like a yellow light. It's a caution. And then 3 to 6, it gets in that red light where after 6 quarters, we're going to make an adjustment and change. Typically in December, this past year, we did it in early January that we made those changes to these funds. And that goes across the board for all participants. It gets automatically remapped. Nothing needs to be done by any participants unless they want to choose and change their allocations to other things. I think last time we met, we did some major changes where we added some Vanguard funds and things in here into the target dates. This is just a performance that you can see. And I know a lot of you have this also on your iPads or printed them off. So it's probably a little bit easier too if you follow along with the report card that you can see those. But these run through all the different funds. There's just about 60 funds in here with both, and I was scrolling a little quick to get down to them. The target date funds of T Row or Vanguard are options for the participants to choose. Remember, this is a defined contribution. So they're able to, it's their own 457 money going in, and they choose to what allocations they want to do. The largest holding is the 2045 fund that we'll talk about in a little while of T Row price that's in here. But we've done those. We've gone through this report before in the past. You can see that that meets all the criteria that are in here, particularly in target dates. A couple of watch lists here, that are on for different funds, and potentially some changes that could happen in the fourth quarter of 2021. Any quick questions or anything on that? Pretty self-explanatory. We've done this before.
Right. Is it just the climate? Would you say the climate's stable, better, worse, guarded?
Climate as in to the fact of the funds themselves?
Yeah, you look at the funds, but
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the quality is kept pretty standard. One of the big things, especially one of the things that we monitor and watch, is obviously make sure they stay in their style boxes. I mean, there's some funds and out there that want to drift from a mid-cap value to a growth, and that's not why we hire them as managers in their style boxes. We want them to stay in those boxes for that reason. And if they start moving, guess what? It's not what was intended by the employee or the consumer. So we need to make those changes, and that's what moves them outside of the box, like Templeton Global. A bond that's looking to do those things. And even American funds, well-known name, Washington Mutual, they're usually in the blended category, but they're shifting between value and growth. And if they make too much of that change where they're not in their blended space, we've got to get a blended category in there, a
Yeah,
blended
a lot-
fund for those options.
Yeah, the problem is usually sometimes the fund managers start to fall in love with their positions. And then as the valuations change, their underlying portfolio just drifts out of their target arena.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's why we give them 6 quarters, to really
Yeah.
do that, because it does make those changes to do that. And it's happened like last year. So I'm shifting to the next tab to show that what we did last, or I should say the beginning of this year is January, but the same report card that comes out on January 8th of this past year, these are what exactly happened to some of those funds. We moved some of them over from like a Guggenheim risk managed real estate just into Barron real estate. And so forth and so on. We got PIMCO Real Return, another well-known fund that's out there, but some of the things we're talking about, it went to American Fund's inflation-linked bond now, in that sense.
Can
And again,
they appeal your classification?
can who appeal our classification?
Can if you say
Fund
this is,
companies?
yeah, you're getting too much more like a growth fund, and they said no, we're whatever.
They can appeal to it, but we look at the prospectus and see what that is, right? That's really what it truly falls into, is what the prospectus says that the majority of what they hold, in those categories. So sometimes they do make those changes, to your point, that they do say, hey, we used to be a blend, but now we're a growth. And if that's the case, yes, we'll move them over to that category. But in those categories, and I'll scroll down so you can see, is if they're staying in this blended category, and they say, well, we're a value fund, if the prospectus still doesn't say that, we've got to remove them, because we only want the blended because we have value over here. We'll move them if they're in that category, which will keep them in the process. But the point is we don't want to have these growth funds, and all of a sudden you got 7 different value funds and not enough growth funds that people want to have a growth fund option.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
So this makes it a little color coded, which I like for those that are not colorblind. But you can see the lighter shade is green. Those are the ones we added, and red are the ones we removed in January 8th of this year. And that's, again, reminder, is automatically done. It's a monitoring process that we've continued to do, particularly for the last 8 years almost in this platform with the 457 and 401A plan. And one thing I'll point out, you do have it here, and it's not utilized a lot. There's a fixed account. So it is a little bit important. The fixed account does pay now. We lowered the rate a little bit. We lowered it 15 basis points in the first quarter, down to 1.05%. But it's extremely better than the money market rates, because now if you haven't paid attention or noticed money market mutual funds out there, they're actually negative because of their expenses. So you're seeing more and more of that because of the low interest rate environment. So not that people utilize it a lot in the retirement plan space. Where we see it the most is retirees that still keep their money in here, that want to have some of that they're liquidating out, that utilize a safe haven of like a fixed account in here. So I just want to point that out to you, that it is in here versus a money market account.
Yeah.
But again, you have all these different funds, and majority of those are using the target date funds, out there in the mix. It's some of the largest holdings, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next, performance. I don't know if I need to get into it too much, go line by line through all these things. And I just highlighted and brought up right away, 2045 fund that we'll talk about in a minute has $2.45 million in assets. Must be the majority of the employees here and closer to that time period. So, those performance, this is your first quarter, your 1 year, your 3 year, your 5 year, and your 10-year performance for target date funds. It's been a good run in the markets, obviously, and some really good returns. Here's just what the Morningstar rates of returns are. And then, Vanguard just down below as well. So you have the T. Rowe 45, the Vanguard 45, and then the Morningstar moderate 45 allocation funds. So you can see they're outperforming those in those categories.
Yeah, they must be pretty happy.
Yeah. Any target date fund participant, the way the markets have done has been very happy. And the importance obviously is having those rebalance, and of course they reallocate as they get closer and closer to retirement. And it's important we remind everybody, employees, and I know Bob and Mike could not join us today, who are our local representatives, if you remember. sit down with the employees, they constantly remind them a couple things. One, about rebalancing, reallocating, and talking about, their time horizons and horizons, but also they most importantly talk to them about beneficiary information and make sure across the board that stuff is updated. And they go back to the HR of the town and make sure that those people that you want for all your insurance benefits and things are the people that you have updated, because there's always a lot of changes that go on.
And wasn't there some kind of stigma with target rate funds a year or two ago? There was some issue where it didn't perform in a certain market.
They vary. I mean, there has been. I mean, the thing about them is you got to remember, and that's why we have both of them in here, Vanguard or index funds. So they're going to be fully invested in these markets. And traditionally, when the markets are going strong, they're going to do extremely well, and they're going to outperform a lot of the active managers that are out there, because guess what? T. Rowe Price, and they always say this, they're going to shift and do some things a little bit with that cash and bond alternative and overweight a little bit of areas. That's why they're paying them, and that's why they have more expenses. So sometimes they outperform in unders. And when you look at the 1-year number in particular, guess why? Because they didn't have any cash. They did when you had, the correction happen last year during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And those short-lived. And when you go out to the 3 and 10 years, there's not much of a difference in those.
Right.
Because target rate funds, I mean, they basically shift the investment profile as they get closer and closer to their target date. So
That's
you
correct.
you get more and more fixed income and less equity exposure. But when you get a discontinuous kind of event like COVID, or God help us, 2007, all that stuff goes pretty much out the window.
Yeah.
And that's the thing here. So we still have the 2010 fund. I mean, you're 11 years removed from somebody being retired, but typically the mixture is close to 60-40, 50-50, depending on what they are when they get to retirement. But that keeps shifting more and more into bonds, and we're not removing them, because you got to remember, yes, and we'll show the employees here in a second, just from a high level, but you have participants that have separated that left their money here as well. Because remember that in the 457, some of them retire or separate early. They can't really do much with this money at, like, say, a 45-year-old, because if they move it to an IRA, they now subject themselves to that 10% penalty. So they're going to leave it behind. So a good monitoring process that goes on, but also this changing for them too.
So would you welcome higher inflation in rates?
Well, just depends on what side of the coin you're on.
Right.
For those that want to save, they definitely want it to go higher. For those that are borrowing a lot more, you'd like to keep it where it's at, because it's cheaper money. I mean, we got to get some normalcy. I mean, think about the last 5 years, what we've had, the ups and downs of the interest rate market and the 10-year treasury big swings that we've had. It hasn't boded well for a lot of people.
Right.
So, and then lastly, what I have here is these are just the updated kind of numbers. And I just went to the investment details section of the health report, because there's 24 pages in the interest of time. I just went into it so you can see, the number of participants that own each one of these funds. So we were talking about Washington Mutual, and that's why I highlighted it here. There's 24 participants potentially, if we make this change in December, that will get remapped to another fund. One of the higher sides, about 600,000 in assets that are in here, contributing a little bit of money each time period. You can see some of the gains and what the closing balances are as of the end of the first quarter.
Hey, Phil, given the distribution of plan participants in these various options, how might you benchmark our menu of offerings relative to others? In other words, do you think, there's a risk of maybe having too many options for people?
Yeah.
Particularly how concentrated people are in the target date funds. There's so many other things, sort of like, if I have one watch, I know what time it is. If I have two watches, I'm never really sure.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. And that's why you see a lot of 401ks, in particular, again, remember, we're non-ERISA world versus ERISA world. So in the ERISA world, they really monitor those down and shrink them down into 1 to maybe 2 in a category if they got an index. In the non-ERISA world, we try to give them a little bit more flexibility. There's about 60 here versus, when you get into, IRAs where they got millions of funds if they go to brokerage accounts and things like that, that we try to give them some choice and options, because particularly with the target date funds, that makes up half of the mix. We give them an option to either choose the traditional, passive Vanguard or the active, T. Rowe Price. we don't want to say one's better than the other because everybody's got their different opinions. Why not just allow them to do both, which you see here in a lot of that. And then you have, a handful of people, because there are over 200 and some participants in here, and this is a well-known fund. You got 24 people in it.
Yep.
So it's not a huge majority that says, hey, I want to do my own thing, but you do get those employees. And in the non-ERISA space, you got to be cautious too, because what I mean by that is you don't really need to be so specific, but you don't want to have it, to your point, Tom, that you don't want to have so many that it adds confusion.
Right.
And just so you're aware, we give them, when they fill out their actual application, they get 4 different ways to choose how to invest. The first is choose the target date fund. The second 2 options are either what we hired as Mesero to choose target portfolios for us. Mesero's out of Chicago, and they create model portfolios based on a portfolio of somebody, which is conservative, moderate. There's 5 of them. And it's one with all the funds and then one with just Vanguard funds. Or the 4th option is choose your own if you want.
Right.
And sometimes people just like to choose their own investment options and do their things. So at the total, I was trying to find the total. I mean, these are breakdowns. You have all this by ages and everything else, loans.
Right.
I know it was back at the beginning, sorry. You're sitting on, no, I can't find it. You want to see if they give us the information. This is the age breakdown of the participants and things like that, and how they're investing. So you have all that to look at again in the end of the time. I'm looking for my totals. They were here. And the same thing happens in the 401A plan. This is the pension alternative where they got the match going in. Same criteria, same things go on. Oh, the plan overview. So there's roughly about $2 million in the 401A plan. You got 122 active participants, up from 120 at the year end. Average account balance is about 15,000 in the 401A plan versus, it's all the way at the beginning. That's why I missed it. 17 million in the 457 plan now. Average account balance is 70,000. We have 208 participants, actually down 1 from the beginning of the year. 59 investments with a balance. Average number of investments, Tom, that is about 4.7 that people are holding in their portfolio.
Yeah.
So the total plan assets are up about 3%, 2.5, something like that, right? Although yeah, I guess that's an irrelevancy, isn't it? Because it's distributed among a gabillion different investment choices.
It's not only distributed, but a couple things in a retirement plan that I remind people, you constantly have new flows, you got outflows and inflows that go in, and you got the growth that are in there as well. Yeah. So it's hard when you just look at these raw numbers and say, here's what the performance is, just because of that. You'd have to you can go into these and dive into them where it shows, here's what it's done. Here's how many came, here's how many left. Because some quarters you may have somebody had a large account balance that all of a sudden retired or separated and rolled it out. It kind of skews it. But to give you an idea, when we started this plan, you were looking at about $7.23 million when we started this. When we took that over. So there's been and I want to say about 120 participants, maybe even a little less.
Okay.
So we've looked at that significant, education and growth that has gone on, again, to help supplement their retirement savings and things like that, and getting their education on top of, getting those to contribute and do what they need to do to help themselves. I mean, I think what you guys have done, not only as a board, but more importantly, as the town for the employees, making this well aware that they have this and doing the different things, because a lot of them don't. They just kind of send out a flyer and this is it, and that's all you got.
Yeah.
Type thing.
So I look at these numbers; they look pretty good. I mean, in terms of growth, I know they're small, but what do you think? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you're looking at, again, 70,000 is your average account balance. You got to remember, you got another side of the coin that we don't talk about. You got the pension plan, which is majority of the time is the big bulk of where their money is coming from and things like that, non-social security people working. So this is, if their balance is this, I mean, they're usually using this a lot of times as their cost of living adjustment and things like that. And especially when you got younger clients, you can look at the demographics, they have smaller balances, which draw down that average too.
Yeah.
But overall, it's, I mean, the benchmark is out there, and they kind of show some of these largest, but you got to remember, the average, what the people do. And we love to see this continue to grow. It's up from 68 to 70. And that's the good thing that you see, is that average account balance keep climbing, because that means we're doing all the right things. We like that, meaning we're getting the education, people are contributing. They're not just taking money out or borrowing and doing all those things. We're having to grow because you didn't have any change and the balance went up by, $2,000.
Yeah.
So Diane, what percentage of the eligible people actually participate in one of these, either one of
Oh,
these?
in the 457. So you really have two pools, I would say. You have the people that are currently in the pension plan, that are just putting money into the 457 as sort of extra retirement. Then you have the group of people that are shut out of the pension plan. And this is really their only means of retirement. And they're the ones that are getting matched for up to, and it depends upon union group. They could be only getting up, matched 5% of their base pay, up to as high as 7% for a public works employee. And that money is going into the 401A. And the public works employees have a mandatory, they have to put in at least 3% of their pay. Whereas other groups, like a town hall union group or a board of education employee, they don't even have to put anything in, but then obviously they won't get matched. So a roundabout way to answer your question, I don't know, but I can find out maybe the amount of eligible employees. I think for the town side, it's pretty high that people are contributing to the 457, and definitely more have been in recent years. The Board of Ed side, I'm not always sure who is, because they control their payroll and their staff. I'm not sure how much knowledge they're giving them as well. But ours, I would say easily is over 75% easily.
Okay.
And your Board of Ed too is your 403B marketplace that has the other retirement accounts. So that's kind of a secondary plan, the 457 for them.
Right, they may not feel the need to put the money in, but then they're leaving, in my opinion, money on the table, because if they're eligible to participate, they would be getting the match.
So we should look at those numbers, shouldn't we? And then someday figure out a way to assimilate and get more efficient and better returns.
You mean better returns on getting more people to participate?
Well,
or investment returns?
We're just not, no, I'm talking about participation. We're just getting them. We don't know even, I thought you said you didn't see the numbers and you don't know it's there.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do think that whenever we get a new hire coming in who's eligible and we onboard them, I'd say 9 times out of 10, they're signing up for the 457, especially if they're not in the pension plan.
Yeah.
I think Neil
They're
was
participating.
I think Neil was talking more in terms of on the Board of Ed side.
Well, I will ask the question of them to get, we'll see what kind of answers I get.
Well, it sounds like right now we don't have the answer. So
I don't, because we don't.
So that's the wrong answer.
Okay, the answer is I will find out the answer for you.
Right, because well, the obvious reasons of size and everything, I assume there is no reason here, George, that bigger is not better. but maybe it doesn't matter. I'm looking for participants and returns to improve, so.
No, I agree with you, Neil. I mean, that's one of the things when I always call it an optional defined contribution plan, right? Yes, you have the match, but if they don't have the means to contribute and they can't, I always say, afford to do it, they're not going to do it, especially those that are in the pension. They just look at it, I got a pension, I don't need to do anything else. I'm about where I can get to. Those that do not, like to what Diane just mentioned, 9 out of 10 are signing up because this is the really truly only means for their future and retirement. That's always been the challenge in the K through 12 market space. I'll just give you an idea. In the Board of Education, the national average is about 28 to 32% only participate in a defined contribution plan. So it's extremely low. And that's why the Department of Labor back in 2009 made a lot of those changes. And most of them are somewhat aware that they can do also the 457, but it's an afterthought because they've only been taught for 50 plus years to do a 403B and not a 457 that started in 2001 with EGTRA that allowed that for that entity. And that's even the mindsets of those that are part of that. So it's always been a challenge to do that. But what you have always done is you guys are always making this available and known. And that's all you can keep doing is just keeping it out there and keeping it in the forefront. You can't force people to sign up, but you just got to keep the advertisements, I always say, and the notices going out that we have this available. We have this available.
Okay.
And it's interesting you say that, Phil, because I think to Neil's point, maybe this is something for another agenda in the future, Diane, which is, you know, there was some discussion in the marketplace. Again, I don't know if this was sort of in the private 401k or whether that's the kind of thing you can put into a 457 or whatnot. But there was a little bit of a debate and some media attention as to whether or not you have employees opt in or whether or not you sign them up and then they have to affirmatively opt out.
Yeah, the automatic enrollment features.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's been mostly in the ERISA world that's been out there and pushing heavily, and even more so because if you have noticed, there's an incentive. So we've had a lot, because we do that on that side of the business, that people have done it because their business is getting $500 credits for putting that option and feature in there. It's not in the non-ERISA world yet. I won't be surprised to see it come very soon.
Yeah, I know. As I mentioned earlier, are the Department of Public Works employees, new hires that are going into the 457, 401A, they have to put in 3% of their pay. That's part of the union contract, and those things were negotiated. And while some of them, you know, these younger guys coming on, you know, some of them may not want it, but I think in the end it is the right thing. But with some of the other unions, I'm not necessarily sure. I guess maybe it is something to think about negotiating in the future too.
Yeah. Okay, we'll put that one on there.
Okay.
And that's all I'll just throw in there to Tom's point. The one challenge you have is you have multiple unions, and to make an automatic feature available, you got to get them all to agree, and that becomes even more of a challenge.
Oh, it sounds great. Okay.
I'm just stopping sharing. I don't know any other questions, things you need from me in regards to this. Obviously, we'll have more in the fall. I'd love to, you know, get back together with the committee, especially because we will make those changes if you'd like to kind of go through what those changes will be. So you're well aware for the December, you know, changes of what's going to happen in the platform, kind of another update now that we're getting some more back, whether we do it virtually or in person, however you guys do it at that point.
Yeah, we'll have a couple of changes around with George leaving. Also, I think we have to think about how we want to educate the Board of Finance, the full Board of Finance, at some time. Like I don't want 2 years going by without you guys seeing them, you know. And you see us, but as charming as that is, I'd like to see it. It's tough, you know. You don't want to overemphasize its importance, but you don't want to like not talk about it either, you know, for its size. And probably Tom and George, you would agree that at some point the Board of Finance should hear about it.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, just, you know.
Yeah.
But, all right. So,
well, if you would like to, you know, think now about scheduling something October or November, we could have Phil back and hopefully also get Connecticut Institute of Finance back and do, a full update to the Board of Finance, if you want. So you should just let me know how you want to approach it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, but I assume everyone thinks that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So Phil, Neil's going to have to give at least a 20,000 foot view to the full Board of Finance on the meeting we just had. So what do you think? What are the key takeaways? I mean, how are you feeling about all of this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the key takeaways that you guys have this monitoring process that goes on in the 457 space, which really is unique in that space, because we take the approach, and we've done this. I mean, in the past, the other providers that you had didn't make any changes really. They don't monitor them. They don't do what we call a best practices, because it's not an ERISA world where they're required to do it. So they just, unless it's forced on them, they don't really do that. We monitor it. There's a criteria. It's out of our hands, and there's no proprietary funds that we have in here, which make it unique. That is, that scope. So to that point, they're non-proprietary funds. The flexibility and the options. If you want to highlight that there's a fixed account versus a money market that have negative returns right now out there in the space for those that really conservative, that's another piece. And again, just go to that first piece that I did on the report card, is just show this is the monitoring that goes on in some of those changes and the remap for us, not only for the current employees, and that's important, but also I always say the separated is service. I don't say retirees, because there's people that just separate that aren't retired, that are also still under your responsibility, as the town, that need to be monitored and taken care of and signed off on loans or whatever they're doing.
How does that sound to you, George?
It sounds pretty good. I think we've come up with a new category now called SNRs, separated but not retired.
Oh my God. All right. What else do we do? Dan, Phil,
Diane, you're on mute.
what's that?
Diane's talking. She's
Sorry
on mute.
about that. I was just going to say, if the committee wants to talk about anything else, and have Phil, if he's concluded his presentation, or if you want to just end the entire meeting, that's fine too.
No, the big thing is everything seems to be going well. You're not really warning us of any big pitfall here. I didn't hear that. And so we're not making any mistakes. I'd like to look into most of the things I want to look into are internal, like this Board of Education number, educating the Board of Finance to the product in general. I suppose when we can see your discard dates and who you throw in and throw out or whatever, when the time comes for that. But I kind of like this sort of investment day, and Diane, where we talk about everybody, and everyone's sort of interested in that once in a while.
Okay.
Does your Board of Education use a third-party service for their 403B? And do they have multiple 457 vendors, or they only have one?
They have multiple places that employees can go, and they literally just hand them a piece of paper and say, here, call this financial guy or woman, and then they have a menu at each of those advisors. They get very little information.
Yeah, and that's just so you guys know, that's the different world that's out there in the 403B space. They're all individual contracts mostly that are written, and they have multiple vendors. So it wouldn't, in our case, just be security benefit. It could be security benefit. It could be an Oppenheimer. It could be a Mass Mutual, a MetLife, and things like that. So that the employees have different choices to choose from. So it adds to that, Neil, to your point earlier about trying to figure this out. It adds a little complexity.
Yeah. Well, everything's complexity about keeping the government and Board of Ed. It's a constant complexity. Yep. But that doesn't mean it can't be done.
No, but like I said to you, those notices and those things, you guys have done a great job over the time period. I just look at our numbers itself at the 457 going from 120 to over 200. You've almost doubled that. And I don't know, it's been around for a long time, which is, means that things are getting out there and known and people are aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Now, I might ask one question, Phil, around there's an appropriate inquiry about whether or not there's sufficient education to get people to participate in the first place. But I'm wondering if your local representatives that are the points of contact and field the questions from people who already have their money in the game, whether or not there's any learning about the type or nature of the questions or the issues to get a sense of whether or not any of the further education is taking hold and they're, gaining traction on some of the principles we'd want them to be aware of as they make some choices within the menu, whether or not the menu is confusing or any of that. Do you think there's anything there to be learned from your local contacts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Tom. I think what their basic thing is to help them understand that they need to save additional money potentially for retirement, right? That's the first step. And when they do that, they start investing, and then they are talking to them about other things. To your point about asking questions about is the platform overwhelming and things like that, a lot of them I don't think dive deep enough into that. They just like, hey, you're helping me, I'm comfortable, and I remind them, you are the GM of your 457. They're just your offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, and hiring those people to do those things. You got to help do those decisions. Don't let everything just run by, our local advisors. You got to make sure it's right for you. But unfortunately, I hate to say it, most people don't get that deep into the weeds on anything that they do. They kind of, and it's been the sad part of doing retirement planning. My biggest thing is retirement readiness for everybody out here in America is, you can always save a little bit of money and put it away. We just don't do it.
It's just as we get deeper into this, and if there is going to be some planning for investment days and all, like Neil was mentioning, it might be helpful to try to make sure that your local contacts are involved in providing feedback into how you design it, so that it's kind of aiming at where we think people's heads are at. You can speak at people all you want, but if your topics aren't resonating with the questions they're carrying around in their head, you wonder how much traction you get.
Right. And I agree. And that's one of the things we do, just to give you an idea, is we actually help them get out to the Department of Labor website and the IRS on the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision, because that's the biggest thing that people have no idea that have pensions in Connecticut and Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth of, in the Northeast, the two bigger states, that really affect them and their spouses when it comes to retirement. And they get shocked when one of them passes away and it's offset. Like, they think this is what it is. So we try to prepare them, and we always mention that, hey, we're not here to scare you. We're here to help you understand and be prepared for these things when these things change.
Yeah, but it's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift.
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Okay, I think we're in good shape. We're actually gonna make our meeting without rushing down the hallway late, which is a good thing. Bill,
Rare thing.
always nice to hear your presentation, as you were perfect in following the orders of being succinct and specific. You think like a bullet point guy, and that's great.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And you're always available too, but we'll have you back for a larger audience too.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Appreciate it.
Are we okay, Diane? Diane.
Okay, adjourning the meeting at 6:40.
Yep. Okay, good.
So
All right.
moved.
Okay, excellent.
Great, terrific. All right.
Thank
See
you.
See you folks
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you all. Take care.